You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. Earlier this week, I was reminded that even though I may be immersed in graph technology on a day-to-day basis, it's still new to a lot of different people. I'll briefly talk about what graphs are and how they are used in technology. Then I came across Goodhart's law in not one, but two different readings this week, so I'm seeing that as probably a popular topic I need to mention. I'll talk about the general principle and then how one article talks about it from a software engineering perspective. To start off, let's look at what a graph is. I had a presentation earlier this week on graphs and AI, and it reminded me that graphs still are sometimes familiar. After almost 7 years at a graph database company, sometimes it's hard to take yourself out of that everyday, this is comfortable and technology that most people know about by now, right? So I realized that is not the case. And I have to remind myself of this frequently, that it's still new in a lot of cases. And just even running a Google search on what is a graph comes up with a variety of different topics. The one that most people gravitate towards first is the idea of charts or diagrams as a graph. We use graphs in mathematics, maybe through school, right? But graph as a technology actually has foundations in a different type of mathematics called graph theory. And one of the articles that came up on the first page of the Google results for what is a graph is a gentle introduction to graph theory. This was a really nice overview to the underlying structure of a graph as used in math and technology. But it's agnostic to any specific technology, so you won't get marketed to or sold to by any specific tech company. But it's definitely geared towards technical readers in both the mathematics and technology space. Not that anyone outside of this wouldn't be able to understand this, but it is definitely geared towards a math and science view and perspective. The article starts by looking at how graphs and trees are a little bit different. Trees are a segment of graphs, basically. So all trees are a type of graph, but not all graphs are trees. It gives a little bit of a highlight there because the overall article is set amongst a bunch of other articles talking about data structures, of course, trees, graphs, and other things, right? But just diving into graphs now, the author talks about the mathematical terms for vertices and edges. Now, if you're familiar with other technology spaces or general tech spaces, you might have heard these referred to as nodes and relationships. That's what Neo4j often uses. Or maybe entities and connections, depending on your space that you operate within. But vertices and edges are the original mathematical terms for this. And the article goes on to look at directed versus undirected graphs. Again, just really hitting the tip of the iceberg in this topic. But again, giving a good overview and just general knowledge of how this stuff kind of works under the hood. The examples that the author gives are, of course, a internet network or connection network, and then a social network. And there's lots more, of course, than just these. The author does say that graphs are all around us and that we don't often realize it. Data is very complicated, and oftentimes it's represented most helpfully by showing how it's connected to one another. For example, we might have different entities and different data points, but we might better understand what we need to do with that data or how to utilize it based on its connections and the other things that it has related to it. I'll link the article in the show notes, a really good introduction. It's about an 11-minute read. Nice overview, again, agnostic to any specific technology. The next thing I want to talk about is Goodhart's law in software engineering. There was an article that I'll link in the show notes specifically on Goodhart's law in software engineering. But let's just define Goodhart's law really quickly. So the law is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, by Charles Goodhart. It's funny because I read this article earlier this week, and I also came across this topic earlier this week in the book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Both the article and the book that I've been reading talk about when you focus too hard on the metric, you often lose sight of that original goal. It's human nature to want to win at any one particular thing, right? We want to achieve, we want to beat the thing we're measuring. For instance, not only are we looking at Olympic winners and that they won a gold, but how many gold medals did they win, a variety of different challenges and so on, or Olympic years. Then we have things like the World Book of Records, which measures accomplishments in all kinds of strange and inventive ways. Then we look at salary comparison, busy schedule comparison. We all want to be better, more, different. In a data-driven world, we tend to overvalue the numbers and then undervalue those ephemeral or intangible things that we actually want to achieve. And it's funny because this also relates to a quote that is, I think, originally from the Jurassic Park movies, but it's used in a variety of different contexts. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. So again, evaluating, just because we can measure something a certain way, should we be measuring it that way? And what is that going to lead us to? When we focus on one particular aspect of that goal and say we want to measure it this way, realize that there's going to be other aspects that if we focus too hard on that one measure, we're going to lose sight and lose those other aspects of that goal. The goals being very complicated, complex things that involve a lot of different things that go into achieving them. Remember that the metric is an approximation of a way to measure that intangible goal. So your general goals might be improve usability, grow community, lose weight, eat healthy, become an expert in a particular industry or topic. And we might have these very general, broad goals, and we might choose to measure any one particular piece of those. But knowing that if we focus too hard on that, we're going to lose other aspects that help us achieve that goal as well. I thought this was really interesting that this cropped up not only in an article I came across, but also the book that I was reading this week. I just wanted to talk about this from even a general life sense, as well as when you're looking at this from a software engineering perspective. It's a good idea to reevaluate or look for alternate perspectives when you are trying to achieve and accomplish something. Just as it's easy to assume general knowledge about something we are familiar with, it's easy to focus on a metric and lose sight of the original goal. It's a good idea to occasionally look for other perspectives and evaluate those routines and measures. I zoomed out this week and talked about what a graph is in a general sense, and then we talked about Goodhart's law, where measures cease to be good when they become the goal instead of as a way to monitor or track it. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.